The morning Helena Carmichael discovered her father's body in the stable, she learned that the world could change in a heartbeat, and that some wounds never stopped bleeding. She had come from Philadelphia 3 months earlier, in the spring of 1882, after her mother's death from consumption left her father grieving and alone in Carlin, Nevada. The town was nothing like the civilized streets she had known all her life, just a dusty collection of wooden buildings clinging to existence along the railroad line, surrounded by sagebrush and empty sky. Her father had moved west 5 years prior to start a freight business, and Helena had stayed behind with her mother, finishing her education at Miss Porter's Academy for Young Ladies. Now at 22, with both parents gone, she stood alone in a world that seemed determined to grind her down to dust. The sheriff, a weathered man named Tom Hutchins, said it looked like her father had been kicked by one of the horses, hit his head on a post and bled out during the night. Helena nodded numbly as the man spoke, her hands clutched together so tightly her knuckles turned white. She was alone now, truly alone in a place where she knew no one and understood even less. The funeral was small. A handful of townspeople came, mostly out of obligation rather than genuine affection. Her father had been respected but not particularly liked, a businessman who kept to himself and drove hard bargains. As the preacher droned on about dust and ashes, Helena stared at the pine coffin and wondered what she was supposed to do now. The freight business was failing, she discovered from the account books. Her father had been hemorrhaging money for months, taking on debt to keep the wagons rolling. She had perhaps 3 months before the creditors would come calling, maybe less. That evening, sitting in the small house her father had built on the edge of town, Helena made a list of her options. She could sell everything and return to Philadelphia, but she had no family there anymore, no prospects. She could try to run the freight business herself, but she knew nothing about commerce or horses or the rough men who worked the routes. Or she could find some other means of survival in this harsh landscape that seemed designed to break anyone foolish enough to challenge it. She was still sitting at the kitchen table when someone knocked on the door. It was late, past 9 o'clock, and fear prickled along her spine as she approached the entrance. Through the window, she saw a tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat, and her hand trembled as she called out, "Who is it?" "Name's Caleb Vance, madam. I worked for your father. Just wanted to pay my respects, if that's all right." Helena opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain latched. The man on the porch removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting and a face that looked younger than she had expected, perhaps 26 or 27. His eyes were a startling blue, and they looked at her with something that seemed like genuine sympathy. "I apologize for the late hour," he said quietly. "I was out on a run when it happened. Just got back into town this evening and heard the news. Your father was a good man to work for." "Fair, which is more than you can say for most." "Thank you," Helena managed, her throat tight. "That's kind of you to say." Caleb Vance shifted his weight, turning his hat in his hands. "I also wanted to let you know that if you need anything, any help settling his affairs or dealing with the business, I'm willing. No charge, just seems like the right thing to do. You should not have to face all this alone." Something in his tone, the gentle way he spoke, surprised her. She had been in Carlin long enough to know that most of the men here were rough, loud creatures who drank too much and spoke too little, who treated women like either property or entertainment. This man seemed different, though she reminded herself not to trust too easily. Her father had warned her before he died that cowboys and freight workers could not be relied upon, that they would drift away the moment something better came along. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Vance, but I can manage," he nodded, accepting the dismissal with grace. "I understand, madam. But the offer stands. should you change your mind. I'll be at the boarding house on Main Street if you need me." He placed his hat back on his head, tipped it politely, and walked away into the darkness. Helena closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. She had not slept properly in days, and her eyes burned with unshed tears. But she could not afford to collapse now. She had to be strong, had to figure out how to survive in this unforgiving place. The next morning, she forced herself to go through her father's papers more thoroughly. The freight business was worse than she had initially thought. He owed money to 3 different creditors, and the contracts he had been relying on had fallen through when the railroad expanded its own delivery service. The wagons were old, the horses were aging, and most of the workers had already drifted away to other jobs. Only 2 remained on the payroll, Caleb Vance and an older man named Dutch Henderson. She was studying a particularly confusing ledger when another knock came at the door. This time, it was mid-morning and sunshine streamed through the windows. She opened the door to find Caleb Vance standing there again, this time with his hat already in his hands. "Morning, Miss Carmichael. I hope I am not intruding, but I thought you might want to know that the horses need feeding and watering. Your father had a routine and they will be getting anxious." Helena felt her stomach drop. She had not even thought about the animals. "Oh, yes, of course. I should have realized. It's a lot to think about," Caleb said gently. "Would you like me to handle it for today? I know you have much on your mind." She wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence, but practicality won out. "Yes, please. And Mr. Vance, if your offer of assistance still stands, I think I could use some guidance. I need to understand exactly what state the business is in." His face softened with what looked like relief. "I would be happy to help, madam. When would you like to go over things?" "Now, if you have the time." He nodded and followed her inside. For the next 3 hours, they sat at the kitchen table while he walked her through the realities of the freight business. He was patient and thorough, explaining things in terms she could understand, never talking down to her or making her feel foolish for not knowing. She learned that her father had been trying to compete with larger operations by taking on routes that barely broke even, hoping volume would make up for thin margins. It had not worked. "The truth is, Miss Carmichael, the business as it stands cannot survive much longer," Caleb said finally, his voice heavy with regret. "The debts are too large and there is not enough income to cover them. Your father knew this, I think. He was working himself to exhaustion trying to find a way through." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Helena heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it. Caleb was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "You could sell the assets, pay off as much of the debt as possible. It would not clear everything, but it would be something. Or," he paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully, "there might be another option. A rancher north of here, William Grayson, has been looking for someone to run regular supply routes to his spread. It's isolated, and the big freight companies do not want to bother with single client contracts. If we could secure that business, it might be enough to stabilize things, at least for a while." "Why has no one approached him before?" "Your father tried, but Grayson's particular. He wants reliability, and he had concerns about whether the business would last. With your father gone, I doubt he will feel any more confident." Caleb met her eyes. "But if you were willing to keep the business running to show him you are committed, he might be persuaded." "I know nothing about running a freight company." "No, but you could learn. And you would have help. Dutch and I, we know the routes, know the work. We could handle the physical side of things. You would need to manage the business end, the contracts and accounts. From what I have seen this morning, you have a good head for figures." It was a compliment, and Helena felt warmth rise to her cheeks. She looked down at the ledgers spread across the table. It seems like a tremendous risk. Living out here is a risk, Caleb said simply. But I believe it could work, if you are willing to try. She studied him, this cowboy who had appeared at her door with kindness and patience, who spoke to her like an equal rather than a foolish woman out of her depth. Everything she had been taught about men like him suggested she should be wary, that cowboys were rough and unreliable, interested only in whiskey and cards and loose women. But Caleb Vance did not fit that mold, at least not from what she had seen so far. "All right," she said finally. "Let us try." The relief on his face was genuine, and he smiled for the first time since she had met him. It transformed his features, softening the hard lines and making him look younger, more vulnerable. "Thank you for trusting me, Miss Carmichael. I will do everything I can to make this work." Over the next 2 weeks, Helena threw herself into learning the freight business. Caleb was true to his word, teaching her about routes and schedules, about how to negotiate with suppliers and maintain equipment. Dutch Henderson, a grizzled man in his 50s with a missing front tooth and a surprisingly gentle manner, showed her how to care for the horses and inspect the wagons for damage. She learned to read the weather, to calculate load weights, to understand the rhythms of a business she had never imagined herself running. It was exhausting work, and she fell into bed each night with her muscles aching and her mind spinning with new information. But it was also satisfying in a way her life in Philadelphia had never been. There, she had been ornamental, educated to be a suitable wife for some man of good family. Here, she was useful, necessary even. The business depended on her decisions, and that weight was both terrifying and exhilarating. Caleb was with her almost every day, patient and encouraging. She began to notice small things about him, the way he always cleaned up before coming to meet with her, his hair damp from washing and his clothes relatively free of dust. The careful way he spoke, choosing his words with precision. The fact that he never raised his voice, even when frustrated, and never cursed in her presence. One evening, as they finished reviewing a particularly complicated contract, Helena asked him, "Where did you learn to speak so well?" "I do not mean any offense, but most of the men I have met in Carlin do not have your vocabulary." Caleb looked embarrassed, a flush rising on his tan cheeks. "My mother was a schoolteacher back in Missouri. She was fierce about education, made sure I could read and write properly. Said it did not matter what work a man did, he should be able to express himself clearly." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. The past tense hung in the air between them, heavy with loss. "I am sorry. It was a long time ago. Fever took her when I was 16. My father had died the year before in an accident, so I headed west to find work." He looked down at the papers on the table. "Ended up here eventually. Your father gave me steady work when I needed it, and I will always be grateful for that." Helena felt a surge of sympathy for this man who had also lost his parents, who understood the loneliness of being untethered in the world. "It sounds like we have that in common, then, being orphans." He met her eyes, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared grief and shared resilience. "I suppose we do." The moment stretched, becoming something more than it had been, and Helena felt her breath catch in her throat. Caleb seemed to feel it too, because he quickly looked away, gathering up the papers with unnecessary bustle. "I should go. It is getting late and you need your rest." After he left, Helena sat at the table for a long time, her fingers tracing the wood grain. She was developing feelings for Caleb Vance, she realized, with a mixture of alarm and excitement. It was foolish and impractical, but she could not seem to help it. He was kind and intelligent, strong but gentle, everything she had not expected to find in this harsh landscape. But she was also realistic enough to know that proximity might be causing her to manufacture emotions that were not truly there. She was alone and grieving, and he was the person who had shown her compassion. That did not necessarily mean anything deeper was forming between them. She needed to be careful, needed to protect herself from disappointment. The next day, Caleb suggested they make the trip to William Grayson's ranch to discuss the supply contract. It was a full day's ride north, through country that was both beautiful and desolate. They left at dawn, Helena riding in the wagon beside Caleb while Dutch stayed behind to mind the stable. The early morning air was cool, and Helena wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders as they rumbled through the awakening town. Once they were beyond Carlin's limits, the landscape opened up into vast stretches of sagebrush and scrub, punctuated by distant mountains that seemed to float on the horizon. The sky was enormous here, bigger than anything Helena had experienced in Philadelphia, and the silence was profound. "It is so empty," she said after they had been traveling for an hour. "Some people find it lonely," Caleb agreed, "but I have always liked it. All this space, it makes you feel like you can breathe." Helena considered this. "I think I understand that." In the city, everything felt so crowded, so many people and buildings and expectations pressing in. Here, at least you have room to think. Exactly. He glanced at her, a smile tugging at his lips. "You are adapting well to the West, Miss Carmichael. Please call me Helena. We have spent enough time together that formality seems silly." "Helena," he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his voice, the soft emphasis he placed on the first syllable. "And you should call me Caleb." "All right, Caleb." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon creaking and swaying over the rough road. Helena found herself studying Caleb's hands on the reins, noting the strength in his fingers, the sureness of his control. Everything he did seemed deliberate and careful, whether he was handling horses or explaining business matters or speaking to her. There was a thoughtfulness to him that she found increasingly appealing. Around midday, they stopped near a small creek to rest the horses and eat the lunch Helena had packed. As they sat on a flat rock near the water, Caleb suddenly reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I have something for you," he said, looking nervous. "I write sometimes, just thoughts and such. After our conversation last night about being orphans, I found myself putting some things down on paper. I thought maybe you would want to read it, but if that is too forward, you can just tell me to put it away." Curious, Helena took the paper and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat and precise, the words arranged in verses. It was a poem, she realized with surprise, and as she read it, her eyes began to sting with tears. The poem spoke of loss and loneliness, of finding unexpected connection in difficult places, of how grief could be shared and thereby lightened. The language was simple but heartfelt, each line carefully crafted. It was beautiful, and more than that, it was genuine. "This is remarkable," she said softly, looking up at him. "I had no idea you wrote poetry." Caleb looked embarrassed again, that flush rising on his cheeks. "It is just something I do sometimes when regular words do not seem enough. I know cowboys are supposed to be all rough and uncouth, but I have always felt that hearts can be gentle too, regardless of what work a man does with his hands." Helena felt something shift inside her chest, a wall she had not even realized she was maintaining beginning to crumble. "Hearts can be gentle too," she repeated. "I like that very much. And you are right, I did assume that men like you would be rough, would not care about things like poetry or careful words. I am sorry for judging you before I knew you. You have no need to apologize. People make judgments based on what they have seen and experienced. It is natural." He met her eyes. "But I am glad I could surprise you. You have surprised me in many ways, Caleb Vance." The air between them felt charged with possibility, and Helena found herself leaning slightly closer without consciously deciding to do so. Caleb noticed, and his breathing changed, became shallower. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and she realized she wanted him to, wanted to feel his lips on hers, to close the distance that separated them. But he pulled back, standing abruptly and brushing off his pants. "We should keep moving if we want to reach Grayson's ranch before dark." Disappointment washed through Helena, but she nodded and folded the poem carefully, tucking it into her own pocket. As they climbed back onto the wagon, she told herself that perhaps it was for the best. They had business to conduct, and romance would only complicate matters. But her heart disagreed, beating faster every time Caleb's shoulder brushed against hers as the wagon jolted along the road. They reached William Grayson's ranch in the late afternoon. It was an impressive spread, with a large main house and several outbuildings, all built from timber hauled in at considerable expense. Grayson himself was a man in his early 50s, with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He welcomed them politely but with clear reservation. "I was sorry to hear about your father, Miss Carmichael," he said as they sat in his parlor. "He approached me several times about establishing a regular supply route, but I was never confident the business would last. Frankly, I am even less confident now that he is gone." Helena had prepared for this. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Grayson, but I want you to know that I am committed to continuing my father's business. I have been learning the operations, and I have excellent help in Caleb here and our other worker, Dutch Henderson. We are prepared to offer you reliable, regular service at a competitive rate." Grayson studied her with those sharp eyes. "No offense, miss, but you are a young woman from back east with no experience in freight operations. Why should I trust you with my supplies?" "Because I have everything to lose if I fail," Helena said simply. "This business is all I have left of my father, all I have in the world. I will not let it fail, not if hard work and determination can prevent it. Give me a trial period. 3 months. If we do not meet your expectations, you can terminate the contract with no penalty. But if we succeed, you will have a dedicated partner who values your business." Grayson considered this, then looked at Caleb. "What do you say, Vance? Is she serious about this, or is this just some fancy that will fade when the work gets hard?" "She is completely serious," Caleb said firmly. "Helena has been learning everything she can about the business. She is smart and hardworking, and she understands what is at stake. I have worked for many people over the years, and I believe she will succeed." The use of her first name, the clear respect and confidence in Caleb's voice seemed to impress Grayson. The rancher nodded slowly. "All right, 3 months' trial as you suggested. I need supplies hauled up here twice a month, heavy loads. Can you handle that?" "Yes," Helena said, relief flooding through her. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson. You will not regret this." They worked out the details of the contract, and Grayson invited them to stay for dinner and spend the night, since it was too late to start back to Carlin safely. Over a meal of roasted beef and potatoes, the rancher became more friendly, sharing stories about the early days of his ranch and asking Helena about Philadelphia. She found herself relaxing, enjoying the conversation and the sense that she had accomplished something significant. Grayson showed them to separate rooms in the ranch house, apologizing for the modest accommodations. Helena's room was small but clean, with a real bed and even a pitcher of fresh water for washing. She changed into her nightgown and sat on the bed, pulling out the poem Caleb had written and reading it again by candlelight. A soft knock on her door made her jump. She grabbed her shawl and wrapped it around herself before opening the door a crack. Caleb stood there, still fully dressed, his expression uncertain. "I am sorry to disturb you," he said quietly. I wanted to congratulate you on how you handled Grayson. You were impressive today. Thank you. I could not have done it without your support." He shifted his weight, looking like he wanted to say something more but was not sure how to begin. Finally, he said, "Helena, I need to be honest with you about something. I have been trying to maintain proper distance, to not overstep any boundaries, but it is becoming difficult." Her heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I have developed feelings for you, strong feelings. I know it is probably inappropriate, given that we work together and that you are grieving your father, but I needed you to know. I understand if you do not feel the same way or if you think it is wrong. I just could not keep pretending that you are simply my employer." Helena's breath caught in her throat. The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes, it made her want to cry and laugh at the same time. "Caleb, I have feelings for you too. I have been trying to convince myself it was just gratitude or loneliness, but it is more than that. When you gave me that poem today, when you spoke about gentle hearts, I realized that you are unlike anyone I have ever met." Relief transformed his face, and he took a step closer. "I write poetry because sometimes the world is harsh, and we need beauty to balance it. You are beautiful, Helena, not just in appearance but in spirit. You are brave and determined, and watching you face these challenges has made me admire you more every day." "I thought all cowboys were rough," she said softly. "I thought you would be like the others I had seen, loud and crude. But you showed me that hearts can be gentle too, that strength does not have to mean hardness." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. His palm was warm and slightly rough from work, but his touch was tender. "May I kiss you?" "Yes." He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, soft and careful. Helena's eyes closed, and she felt the world narrow down to this single point of contact, this moment of connection. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, and she felt his other hand come up to tangle in her hair. She gripped his shoulders, holding on as waves of feeling washed through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I should go before I forget myself entirely." "Stay," Helena whispered. "Just for a little while we can talk." He hesitated, clearly torn between desire and propriety. "People might think poorly of you. Everyone is asleep, and I do not care what people think. I just want to be with you." So he stayed, and they sat on the bed talking in whispers until the candle burned low. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his mother's love of literature and his father's skill with horses. She told him about Philadelphia, about the suffocating expectations and the constant judgment, about how her mother's death had made her realize she needed more from life than just being ornamental. "You are not ornamental," Caleb said fiercely. "You are essential. You matter, Helena, not because of your appearance or your manners, but because of who you are, what you bring to the world." His words settled into her heart like seeds taking root, and she felt something bloom inside her, something she thought might be hope. They kissed again before he left, and this time it was slower, sweeter, a promise rather than just a moment. The ride back to Carlin the next day felt different, charged with new intimacy. They talked easily, laughed together, and when Caleb reached over to take her hand, Helena laced her fingers through his without hesitation. She felt young and alive in a way she had not since her mother first got sick, as if the world had suddenly expanded to include possibilities she had not imagined. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened alongside their business partnership. The first supply run to Grayson's ranch went smoothly, and the second even better. Helena's confidence grew with each successful delivery, and she began to see a path forward, a way to not just survive but thrive. Caleb continued to write poetry for her, leaving folded papers where she would find them on the kitchen table, tucked into the account books, once even hidden in her coat pocket. Each poem revealed more of his inner life, his thoughts about love and connection, his appreciation for the beauty in everyday moments. She treasured them all, keeping them in a small wooden box that had belonged to her mother. One poem in particular struck her deeply. It was about two people learning to trust again after loss, about how vulnerability could be strength rather than weakness. The final lines read, "In the wild places of this world we find each other, two hearts beating steady through the storm, gentle enough to hold, strong enough to last." "You have such a gift with words," she told him that evening as they sat together on the porch of her house, watching the sun set over the Nevada landscape. "Have you ever thought about publishing your poems?" Caleb laughed softly. "I do not think the world is much interested in poetry from a cowboy. Besides, I write them for you, not for strangers. Still, they deserve to be shared. They are beautiful, Caleb, truly." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "You are beautiful. The poems are just my attempt to capture what I feel when I am with you." Helena leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. They had not made love yet, both holding back out of a combination of propriety and caution, but the tension between them grew stronger every day. She wanted him, wanted to know him completely, but she was also afraid. What if physical intimacy changed things between them? What if it was disappointing, or if he lost interest afterward? As if reading her thoughts, Caleb said quietly, "I want you to know that I am not going anywhere. Whatever happens between us, whatever we choose to do or not do, I am committed to being here. This is not some passing fancy for me, Helena. I am falling in love with you." She sat up and turned to face him fully. "You are?" "Yes." He took both her hands in his. "I know it has only been a few weeks, but I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You challenge me, inspire me, make me want to be better than I am. And I love you, simple as that." Tears filled Helena's eyes, but they were happy tears, the kind that came from overwhelming emotion. "I love you too, Caleb. I think I have been falling in love with you since you first came to my door and offered to help." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and when he pulled back his voice was rough with desire. "Helena, I want to marry you. I know it is fast, probably too fast by conventional standards, but out here things move differently. Life is unpredictable, and when you find something real, you hold on to it. Will you be my wife?" She had not expected a proposal, not yet, but hearing the words filled her with certainty. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." The joy on his face was incandescent, and he stood up, pulling her with him and spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and this time there was no holding back. Helena felt the full force of his desire, his need, and answered it with her own. "We should wait until the wedding," Caleb said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We should," Helena agreed, even as her hands moved to the buttons of his shirt. They did not wait. They stumbled inside, shedding clothes in a trail toward the bedroom, kissing and touching with growing urgency. When they finally came together, it was both tender and fierce, a claiming and a giving, a joining that felt like coming home. Afterward, lying tangled together in her bed, Helena felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was right, she knew with bone-deep certainty. This man, this place, this new life she was building, it was all exactly where she was meant to be. They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Carlin. Dutch served as witness, along with a few townspeople who had begun to warm to Helena as word spread of her determination to keep her father's business running. She wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and Caleb wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Caleb kissed her, Helena felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was her future, this gentle-hearted cowboy who wrote her poetry and believed she could do anything she set her mind to. They spent their wedding night in Helena's house, which was now their house, making love with the freedom of knowing they belonged to each other. In the morning, Caleb made coffee and brought it to her in bed, along with a new poem. This one spoke of beginnings and hope, of two souls finding each other in the vastness of the frontier. "I will write you 1,000 poems," he promised, sitting beside her on the bed. "One for every day we are together. That is a lot of poems, and you are worth every word." Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. They worked together during the day, running supply routes and managing the business, and spent their evenings planning for the future. The contract with Grayson's ranch provided steady income, and they began to attract other clients, small ranchers and distant settlements that needed reliable freight service. The business was not wealthy, but it was stable, and that was enough. Dutch eventually retired, his aging body no longer able to handle the physical demands of the work. They threw him a farewell party and helped him set up a small room in town where he could live comfortably. Caleb hired 2 new workers, younger men who were eager for steady employment. Helena proved to be a capable manager, firm but fair, and the workers respected her even as they occasionally grumbled about having a woman boss. "Let them grumble," Caleb said when she worried about it. "You are good at this and they know it. That is what matters." 6 months into their marriage, Helena realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She told Caleb that evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He looked stunned for a moment, then broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "We are having a baby, truly. Yes, are you happy?" "Happy." He picked her up and spun her around just as he had the night he proposed. "Helena, I am beyond happy. We are going to be parents. This is incredible," she laughed, giddy with relief. "I was worried you might not be ready." "I have been ready since the moment I fell in love with you. Our child is going to be so lucky, having you as a mother. And you as a father." They stood in the kitchen, holding each other close, and Helena felt gratitude wash through her. A year ago, she had been alone and grieving, struggling to survive in an unfamiliar place. Now she had a husband who loved her, a business that was thriving, and a baby on the way. Life could change in a heartbeat, she had learned, but sometimes that change was miraculous rather than tragic. The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Helena had to scale back her physical involvement in the business as she grew larger. Caleb was protective, sometimes overly so, and she had to remind him that she was pregnant, not fragile. But his care came from love, and she appreciated it even when she found it exasperating. He continued to write her poems throughout her pregnancy, documenting his excitement and fears, his wonder at the changes in her body, his dreams for their child. She kept every single one, adding them to her collection in the wooden box. Their son was born on a cold February night in 1883, after 12 hours of labor that left Helena exhausted but exhilarated. Caleb was with her throughout, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and when the midwife finally placed the baby in her arms, she saw tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Caleb said, his voice choked with emotion. "Helena, he is perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Looking down at her son's red, scrunched face, Helena felt inspiration strike. "Thomas, after my father, Thomas Vance." Caleb nodded, smiling. "Thomas Vance, I like that very much." Being parents changed them both. Caleb proved to be a natural father, patient and playful, singing to Thomas and telling him stories even when the baby was too young to understand. Helena discovered reserves of energy she had not known she possessed, managing the baby and the business with help from Caleb and their workers. They hired a young woman from town, Sarah Mitchell, to help with housework and watching Thomas when both parents needed to focus on freight operations. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Helena watched Caleb with their son and fell in love with him all over again. The gentleness she had first seen in him, the tenderness that had surprised her, was even more evident now. He taught Thomas to be kind, to appreciate beauty, to think before acting. He wrote poems for their son too, silly verses that made the little boy giggle and clap his hands. "You are such a good father," Helena told him one evening after they had put Thomas to bed. "I want him to grow up knowing that strength and gentleness are not opposites," Caleb said. "That he can be tough enough to survive out here but tender enough to love fully, that hearts can be gentle too." Those words again, the phrase that had become something of a motto for their family. Helena leaned over and kissed him. "He will know that. You are teaching him every day by example." The freight business continued to grow. By the time Thomas was 3, they had expanded to 6 wagons and a dozen employees. They moved into a larger house on the other side of Carlin, one with room for their growing family and a proper office for Helena to manage the accounts. Caleb took over more of the route management, while Helena handled contracts and finances. They were a good team, complementing each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. When Helena became pregnant again in 1886, they were both delighted. Thomas was old enough now to understand that he would have a sibling, and he talked excitedly about being a big brother. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with more sickness and exhaustion, but Helena pushed through. She had learned she was stronger than she had ever imagined, capable of enduring more than she had thought possible. Their daughter was born in September, a tiny, dark-haired girl with Caleb's blue eyes. They named her Catherine, after Caleb's mother, and Thomas fell instantly in love with his baby sister. He was gentle with her, copying the tenderness he had seen from his father, and Caleb wrote a poem about watching his son hold his daughter for the first time. Life was full and busy, sometimes overwhelming, but Helena would not have traded it for anything. She had found her place in the world, had built something meaningful with the man she loved. The girl from Philadelphia, who had thought she knew what life was supposed to look like, had learned that real living happened in unexpected places, with unexpected people. When Thomas started school, Helena became involved in the local education committee, pushing for better resources and more qualified teachers. She had not forgotten her own excellent education, and she wanted the children of Carlin to have access to good learning. Caleb supported her efforts, even as some of the townspeople grumbled about her Eastern ideas and uppity ways. "Let them grumble," he said, echoing her words from years earlier. "You are making things better, and that is what matters." The town was changing, growing more civilized as the frontier pushed further west. More families were settling in Carlin, more businesses opening. The railroad brought increased commerce, and the freight business adapted, finding new niches and opportunities. Helena's acumen for business became well known, and other entrepreneurs began seeking her advice. Through it all, Caleb remained her anchor, the gentle heart that had first drawn her to him. He still wrote her poetry, though less frequently now that their days were consumed with work and children. But every poem was treasured, proof that romance could survive mundanity, that love could deepen over time rather than fade. When Thomas was 10 and Catherine 7, Helena's old life in Philadelphia reached out to claim her attention. A distant cousin she barely remembered wrote to inform her that Helena's mother's family home was being sold. and as the last surviving relative, she had a right to any possessions she wanted to claim before the estate was liquidated. The letter stirred complex emotions, nostalgia for a place she had not thought about in years, curiosity about what might be left of her mother's belongings, and a strange reluctance to revisit that part of her past. "You should go," Caleb said when she showed him the letter. "Sarah can help me with the children, and the business can spare you for a few weeks. It might be good for you to make peace with that part of your life." Helena was not sure she wanted to go, but she recognized the wisdom in his words. So she took the train east, a journey that felt both familiar and alien. Philadelphia was louder and more crowded than she remembered, the air thick with coal smoke and human noise. After the wide spaces of Nevada, the city felt suffocating. The house where she had grown up was smaller than her memory had painted it, the rooms cramped and dark. She walked through them slowly, touching familiar objects and remembering moments from her childhood. In her mother's bedroom, she found a trunk full of old letters and photographs, documents that told the story of her parents' courtship and early marriage. She spent hours reading them, crying occasionally, mourning not just her mother but the innocent girl she herself had been. But when the visit was over and she boarded the train back west, Helena felt only relief. Philadelphia was no longer her home. Her home was in Nevada with Caleb and their children, in the life they had built together. The wide spaces, the harsh beauty, the community they had become part of, that was where she belonged. Caleb was waiting at the station when she arrived, Thomas and Catherine beside him. The children ran to her, and she swept them into her arms, breathing in their familiar scent. Then Caleb was there, wrapping his arms around all of them, and Helena felt complete. "I missed you," he said into her hair. "I missed you too. I am glad to be home." That night, after the children were asleep, Caleb gave her a new poem. This one spoke of journeys and returns, of how we carry our past with us but are not defined by it, of choosing where we belong. She cried as she read it, overcome by the depth of his understanding, the way he could see into her heart and reflect back what he found there. "Thank you," she whispered, "for knowing me so well." "Thank you for choosing me," he replied, "for choosing this life even when it was hard and uncertain. I would choose you 1,000 times over. You showed me that cowboys are not all rough, that hearts can be gentle too. You showed me what love really means." They made love that night with the passion and tenderness of long familiarity, knowing each other's bodies as well as they knew each other's souls. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Caleb's arm around her, Helena reflected on the strange turns life could take. If her father had not died, if Caleb had not come to her door that first night, if she had not taken the risk of trying to save the freight business, she would have missed all of this. Sometimes tragedy opened doors we did not know existed, leading us to places we were meant to be. The years continued to pass, marked by small triumphs and minor setbacks, the steady accumulation of a life well lived. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who combined his mother's business sense with his father's gentleness. Catherine was fierce and independent, determined to prove that girls could do anything boys could do. Helena encouraged her, seeing in her daughter a reflection of her own struggle to be taken seriously in a world that often dismissed women. Caleb's hair began to gray at the temples, and Helena noticed laugh lines deepening around his eyes. She knew she was aging too, saw it in the mirror every morning, but somehow it did not matter. They were growing old together, and that felt like its own kind of victory. When Thomas turned 18 in 1898, he announced that he wanted to join the freight business, to learn it from the ground up just as his mother had. Helena and Caleb were both pleased, though they insisted he start at the bottom, loading wagons and mucking stables, earning the respect of the other workers rather than coasting on his family name. He accepted the challenge with good grace, proving himself capable and hardworking. Catherine, meanwhile, declared her intention to become a teacher like her grandmother had been. She was 15 now, brilliant and passionate about education, and Helena supported her ambitions wholeheartedly. The world was changing, offering women opportunities that had not existed in Helena's youth, and she wanted her daughter to seize every chance. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how far we have come," Helena said to Caleb one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you remember when we first met? I was so lost, so uncertain about everything." "I remember," Caleb said, reaching over to take her hand. "But I also saw your strength even then. You just needed a chance to realize it yourself. You gave me that chance. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. We gave each other chances," he corrected gently. "You took a risk on a cowboy who wrote poetry, who did not fit the mold of what you expected. That took courage too." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling grateful and content. "Hearts can be gentle too," she murmured. "That is what you taught me. And you taught me that love can be a partnership, that strength comes in many forms. We taught each other, Helena. That is what marriage should be." In 1900, as the new century dawned, the Vance family gathered to celebrate Thomas's engagement to Emma Richardson, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. It was a joyous occasion, and as Helena watched her son with his bride-to-be, she saw echoes of her own young love. Caleb must have noticed her expression because he squeezed her hand and whispered, "Our boy chose well. She is strong like you." The wedding took place in the spring, a larger affair than Helena and Caleb's own had been, with half the town in attendance. As she danced with Caleb at the reception, Helena felt the years fall away. He still made her heart race, still surprised her with his thoughtfulness and tenderness. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" he asked, his blue eyes still bright despite the lines around them. "Yes, but I never get tired of hearing it. I love you, Helena Vance, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." She kissed him there on the dance floor, not caring who saw, and felt the same spark she had felt all those years ago when he first kissed her at Grayson's ranch. Some things never faded. Some feelings only grew stronger with time. Catherine graduated from teacher training in 1903 and took a position at the Carlin School, bringing fresh energy and innovative methods to her classroom. Helena and Caleb attended her first day, watching with pride as their daughter commanded the attention of 30 children ranging from 6 to 14. She had inherited the best qualities from both of them, Helena's determination and Caleb's gentle authority. Thomas and Emma gave them their first grandchild in 1904, a boy they named Caleb after his grandfather. Holding the baby, Helena felt the circle of life completing itself. Her son was now a father, starting his own family, building his own future. She and Caleb were grandparents, entering a new phase of their lives. The freight business continued to thrive under Thomas's management. He modernized operations, invested in better equipment, and expanded into new territories as the West continued to develop. Helena gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations, though she remained involved in strategic decisions. She found herself with more time for the community work she had always cared about, serving on boards and committees, using her influence to improve Carlin and its surrounding areas. Caleb also scaled back his physical work, his body no longer able to handle the demands of long wagon routes. But he stayed involved, mentoring younger workers and helping Thomas navigate difficult decisions. And he continued to write poetry, not just for Helena now but for their grandchildren, creating verses that entertained and educated, that passed on values and stories. "You should really publish a collection," Helena urged him one evening in 1906, as she read his latest poem to their now 4 grandchildren. Thomas and Emma had added 2 more boys to the family, and Catherine had married a local merchant and had a daughter. "Perhaps," Caleb said, though he looked doubtful. "I suppose it might be nice to leave something permanent behind, something more than just memories." With Helena's encouragement and help, Caleb compiled his best poems into a manuscript. She found a small publisher in San Francisco willing to take a chance on a collection of Western poetry, and in 1907, Gentle Hearts, Poems from the Frontier was published under the name C. Vance. The book was not a bestseller, but it found an audience among people who appreciated honest, heartfelt writing about life in the West. Reviews praised the poem's authenticity and emotional depth, and several were reprinted in Western magazines and newspapers. Caleb was bashfully pleased by the attention, though he insisted it was no big deal. But Helena saw how he lit up when readers wrote to him about how his words had moved them, and she was glad she had pushed him to share his gift with the world. Their 50th wedding anniversary arrived in 1933, and their family organized a large celebration. Thomas, now 50, was running a freight operation that had evolved into a successful logistics company with routes throughout the Southwest. Catherine, 46, had become the principal of Carlin's expanded school system. Between them, they had given Helena and Caleb 8 grandchildren and, as of the previous year, 2 great-grandchildren. At the party, surrounded by generations of family and friends, Helena felt overwhelmed by gratitude. She was 72 now, her dark hair silver, her face lined with age. Caleb was 76, moving more slowly but still sharp-minded and tender-hearted. They had built a remarkable life together, had created a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Thomas stood to give a toast, his voice thick with emotion. "To my parents, who showed me what real love looks like. Who taught me that business success means nothing without integrity, that strength and gentleness are not opposites, that hearts can be gentle too, regardless of the work our hands must do. Thank you for everything you have given us, for building a foundation we all stand on. Here is to 50 more years." Everyone laughed at that, knowing 50 more years was unlikely at their age, but Helena appreciated the sentiment. She looked at Caleb, saw tears on his weathered cheeks, and reached over to take his hand. 50 years, she said softly. "Can you believe it?" "Best 50 years of my life," he replied. "And I would do it all again, every challenge, every struggle, just to end up here with you. I love you, Caleb Vance. I love you, Helena Vance, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." It was their private joke, that phrase he had first said to her at Thomas's wedding, and it never failed to make her smile. After the party, when they were finally alone in their bedroom, Caleb pulled out a folded piece of paper. "One more poem," he said, "for this occasion." Helena took it with trembling fingers and read. This poem spoke of a lifetime shared, of challenges overcome and joys multiplied, of 2 people who had grown together rather than apart. The final lines brought tears to her eyes. "In the sunset years of this wild journey, I hold your hand and count each blessing, grateful for the day you chose to trust a cowboy who wrote poetry, who promised hearts can be gentle too." "Oh, Caleb," she whispered, "this is beautiful." "You make everything beautiful," he said. "That is your gift." They held each other that night, 2 old people with a lifetime of memories, and Helena felt perfectly content. She had been so lost when she first came to Nevada, so uncertain of who she was or what she wanted. Caleb had helped her find herself, had supported her as she built a new identity out of grief and hardship. And she had helped him too, had given him a family and a purpose beyond drifting from job to job. They had saved each other, she realized. Not in some grand, dramatic fashion, but in quiet daily ways, through patience and kindness, through believing in each other when times were hard. That was what real love looked like, not fireworks and grand gestures, but steady presence, unwavering support, gentle hearts beating together through the years. The final years of their lives were peaceful. They spent time with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, tended a garden behind their house, and took slow walks through Carlin, greeting neighbors and friends. Caleb's poetry book continued to sell steadily, finding new readers in each generation, and he occasionally received letters from people who had been moved by his words. Helena continued her community work at a reduced pace, focusing on causes close to her heart. Caleb passed away in his sleep in 1935, at the age of 78. Helena woke that morning to find him still and cold beside her, his face peaceful, one hand resting on her shoulder even in death. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her, but she held on, drawing strength from their children and grandchildren, from the community they had built, from the love that had sustained them for more than half a century. She found a final poem in his desk, written in his careful handwriting. It was addressed to her, to be read after his death. Through her tears, she read his words about eternal love, about how death was not an ending but a transformation, about how he would wait for her on the other side. The last line read, "Until we meet again, my love, know that my heart was always, always gentle with you." Helena lived for another 8 years after Caleb's death, surrounded by family, continuing to honor his memory through acts of kindness and community service. She established a scholarship fund in his name for students who showed both academic promise and artistic talent, wanting to encourage young people who, like Caleb, might not fit conventional molds. She spent her final years compiling their story, writing it down so that future generations would know how their love had begun, how it had grown, how it had endured. She included many of Caleb's poems, wanting his voice to echo through time. She wrote about her journey from a lost young woman in Philadelphia to a successful business owner in Nevada, about how love had transformed her understanding of herself and the world. When Helena passed away in 1943, at the age of 82, she was buried beside Caleb in the Carlin Cemetery, their headstones simple but elegant. The inscription on her stone read, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she believed hearts could be gentle too." On his beloved husband, father, and poet, he proved hearts could be gentle too. Their story became part of Carlin's history, told and retold by descendants and townspeople. The freight company Thomas built became a regional powerhouse, eventually modernizing into a trucking operation that served the entire Southwest. Catherine's descendants continued in education, several becoming teachers and administrators, carrying on her grandmother's commitment to learning. But more than business success or professional achievement, the legacy Helena and Caleb left was one of love and gentleness, of proving that strength did not require hardness, that cowboys could write poetry and Eastern ladies could run freight operations, that hearts could be tender even in the harsh landscape of the frontier. Their great-great-grandchildren, living in a world transformed beyond recognition from the one Helena and Caleb had known, still treasured the poems Caleb had written, still told stories about the love that had sustained their family through generations. The wooden box that had held Helena's collection of poems became a family heirloom, passed down through the years, a tangible reminder that love, when nurtured and protected, could outlast any individual life. In the end, That was the truth Helena and Caleb had discovered together in that rough Nevada town so many years ago. Love was not just passion or romance, though it included those things. Love was choosing to believe in someone when they struggled to believe in themselves. Love was patience and kindness, was writing poetry for no other reason than to express what words alone could not capture. Love was gentle hearts finding each other in harsh places and choosing, every day, to be tender with each other. She had thought cowboys were all rough when she first arrived in Carlin, had assumed that men who worked with their hands and lived close to the earth would be coarse and insensitive. But Caleb had proven her wrong, had shown her that hearts could be gentle too, that real strength included the capacity for tenderness. And in teaching her that lesson, he had given her the greatest gift possible, the freedom to become herself, fully and completely, in a partnership that had honored both their strengths and vulnerabilities. Their story lived on, not because it was dramatic or unusual, but because it was true. It was the story of two people who found each other at the right moment, who chose to build something together despite uncertainty and hardship, who loved each other with gentle hearts for more than 50 years. And in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving, that simple story of enduring love offered hope, proof that tenderness could survive, that gentleness was its own form of strength, that hearts, whether belonging to cowboys or Eastern ladies, or anyone else, could always choose to be gentle too. The sun set over Carlin, casting long shadows across the cemetery where Helena and Caleb rested side by side. In the town they had helped build, in the family they had created, in the hearts of everyone their story touched, their love continued to shine. It was a beacon for those who felt lost, a promise that connection was possible even in the loneliest places, that gentleness and strength could coexist, that love, when given freely and received gratefully, could transform everything. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when bodies fail, two hearts beat together still, gentle and strong, patient and passionate, eternally young in the ways that mattered most, forever proving that love, real love, never truly ends.